Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. As people are coming in and joining the meeting, we'll just have a few more minutes of quiet, but we have a fantastic speaker and I think an engaging discussion today. So thanks for being here. On behalf of my colleague and co-lead Ken Mayer, welcome, and we'll start the presentation shortly. Okay, I expect that we'll have some people continue to join, but we'll go ahead and get started. I'm very excited to see all of you here today. I'm very grateful to be kicking this meeting off with Ken and to be able to introduce our speaker, Mitchell Warren. I'll give a brief intro and then we'll get rolling with the presentation. Mitchell Warren has served as the executive director of AVAC since 2004 and has led the organization's strategic direction and partnerships across global HIV prevention and research. And during the time of his leadership, AVAC expanded from HIV vaccine advocacy to a broader focus on biomedical prevention options and product access. And he played a key role in developing the UNAIDS AVAC Good Participatory Practice guidelines. Mitchell is the co-chair of the Global HIV Prevention Coalition, a member of the Scientific Advisory Board of PEPFAR, in whatever its current form, and the International AIDS Society Governing Council, president of the TB State Alliance Stakeholder Association, and past president of the Global HIV Vaccine Enterprise. Previously, he served as a senior director for vaccine preparedness at IAVI, Vice President of International Affairs for the Female Health Company, and at Population Services International, designing and implementing social marketing, communications, and health promotion activities, including 5 years running for PSI's project in South Africa. Mitchell has degrees in English and history from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and studied health policy at Johns Hopkins University School of Hygiene and Public Health. And the last thing I'll say that's not on my prepared thing is it's just so nice to convene today at a time when we need vision and we need inspiration, and all of us are thinking about what steps we can take to continue the momentum and the important work of HIV prevention. So I can think of no one better prepared to enlighten and inspire us. And Mitchell, thank you so much for being here today, and we'll turn things over to you. I will say, sorry, before I turn things over, we encourage people to put questions in the chat during the talk. We'll be able to organize them, and we'll have a time at the end for questions. So you may want to unmute and ask questions, and that's fine, but you can also just record them in the chat for now so we capture all of them. So with that, Mitchell, over to you.
Great, Patrick and Ken both. Thank you so much. And for that really kind introduction. The last part of it, though, Patrick, leaves me deeply worried. I had a disclaimer slide at a number of presentations in Kigali at the IAS meeting a few weeks ago that, spoiler alert, this is depressing. I hope I can help everyone elevate up from that level. I've said in a number of settings recently that you don't work in HIV, any of us, and I'm looking at those of you on the line, and many of you have walked this journey with me for many decades. You don't work in HIV if you're not at heart an optimist. You wouldn't be still doing this. And I think back to early work, Ken, with you and Patrick too. So you have to be an optimist. So I want to say that up front, because I will tell you every day is a little harder to be an optimist in these last 6 months. But I hope I can convey a sense that we've got to find a way forward, because this work is too important. What we've achieved as a collective, not just those on the line, but as a collective community of researchers and policymakers and funders and advocates, most of all, community at the center, it was too important, the hard fought wins that we've made. And we, as Linda Gale Becker, and if you actually want to disconnect now and just go tune into an IAS recording, possibly the single greatest talk I've ever heard in my career was Linda Gale Becker opening at the IAS meeting a few weeks ago. And she said, we can't go back. And it is a beautiful talk. I highly, highly recommend it. And throughout that week in Kigali, I also was reminded that not only can we not go back, but we actually can't get stuck in the status quo. We have got to figure out a way forward. And I hope to at least give you a sense of at least my view of how to do that from a prevention perspective. I'll try to do it as quickly as I can. A lot of you on the line have generated the work that I'm presenting, so I can probably go fairly quickly because I really would love to hear reactions, perspectives, and what to do. Pretty straightforward. I'm going to talk a bit about what we have and haven't achieved as targeted in the last decade by UNAIDS. I'm going to do a bit of a language check. As Patrick said, I'm an English history and women's studies student. Although I did some public health work, I never got an advanced degree, so I'm probably the least educated on this call. But I'm going to do a language check from my English language days. Talk a bit about the journey of prevention, both for programs and for people. Talk about the oral prep experience and the pipeline to come. And most of all, what decisions need to be made and how best we might make those. This slide is not going to surprise any of you. Obviously, huge, it's so interesting when you watch how UNAIDS presents the data. Huge progress since 2000 or since 2010, even in terms of declining incidence. But when you zoom in on the last few years, we have slowed. And in fact, the data that was presented just before the conference in Kigali of 2024 was that the infection rate was the same as it was in 2023, about 1.3 million new infections. Again, although presented in 2025, that was data from 2024 before a US presidential election, before an inauguration, before the most dramatic destruction of foreign assistance that we've ever seen. So we were flatlined anyway, and the risk of going up, as I'll show you in a few slides, is real, even as we've added these new prevention options. And for those who know AVAC or know me, I spent a lot of my time thinking about all these great new prevention options, and they are great. Whether it's oral prep or the vaginal ring or cabotegravir or lenacapavir, these are great options, and not one of them has had huge impact on the overall epidemic. Certainly oral prep, which we learned about 15 years ago. I also play part of the court historian here. We first learned of the IPREX result in 2010. 15 years ago, we knew a pill a day could prevent HIV. And except for a few areas of this country and a few other places around the world, we've not seen huge impact. So we don't have a failure of imagination or a failure of science. We have a failure of an ability to have the imagination on the delivery side and translating that into actual impact. And all of that just got a hell of a lot harder. And you don't need me to share this slide. I'm shockingly reminded we're only 6 months into a 4-year presidential administration. And if we think that it's been a terrible 6 months and now we just have to deal with it for the next 3.5 years, I sadly think we've had terrible 6 months and we're going to expect more terrible news every step of the way. This is just related to foreign assistance from USAID, which was actually, interestingly enough, one of the very first executive orders. And just today, there was a great article in DevEx, a summary that walks you through all of this that I highly recommend. And if someone else doesn't put it in the chat, I'll put it in the chat when I'm done talking. But you can see what happened. Of course, the administration said, oh, we were just kidding. Of course, we're all about life saving. And PEPFAR is really important. And it is, and it still exists. And they granted a waiver in February. And I always say waiver in inverted commas because it didn't fundamentally restart programs. One, because we all know that these programs don't work on-off switches. And just from January 20th to February 1st, you couldn't just restart things. Staff were laid off. Trust was lost, programs were being dismantled. But in addition, the limited waiver is not getting PEPFAR back on track. It's pigeonholing it in very specific ideologic ways, which is one of the reasons why on February 10th, we and others sued the government in the first lawsuit, AVAC versus the Department of State. The lesson in all of this, and I know some of you are in academia, and I highly recommend suing when you can. I never thought I'd say that. It is important to document, even as USAID is not going to come back in any form now. But foreign assistance will. But we sued because we wanted to demonstrate the illegality of this administration. And I know many of you are in institutions that are similarly doing that with related to NIH. But one of the big lessons in all of this, and there are a number of ways to chart the impact of this destruction. But one of the lessons I have learned is that this administration moves with lightning speed and cruelty. The judicial branch operates slowly and methodically, as is its wont, and Congress operates not at all, and by any stretch of the imagination of what a Congress should be doing. And so that's been a real challenge, but important to note that it does matter to get everything on the record. So I would have showed this slide on January 19th, or frankly, had Kamala Harris been elected president. This was the pipeline at the beginning of 2025. And it's an exciting one because more and more things were being added here over the last 10 or 15 years about circumcision, about U equals U, about oral prep. Of course, a number of additional methods, and lenacapavir most recently being approved and recommended. And then, very importantly, and I'll talk about it a bit later, the advance of the monthly oral pill for PrEP, moving from phase 2 into now efficacy trials that are just now beginning. I think some of the most exciting news that came out of IAS. Super, super exciting. And yet, in the midst of that, the impact of what USAID and NIH does is dramatic. Of course, the U.S. isn't everything, and it's less and less each day. But when it comes to biomedical research and the HIV response, the adage, when America sneezes, the world catches pneumonia, is really true. And you can see every step of the way, whether it's about delivering what we have with PEPFAR funding, or whether it's what happened in this very robust, I should highlight, a lot of what was in this preclinical development program was funded by USAID and the NIH, but USAID really took on antiretroviral-based PrEP in a wonderful program being led by Sharon Hillier, who leads one of the CFARs. And that was a program funded by USAID. That was one of the first programs to be entirely cut, even with clinical trials actually ongoing. And then, of course, the NIH terminating various vaccine programs. I'll note particularly the destruction of the CHOV-Ds, the collaborations for AIDS vaccine discovery. One led at Scripps by Dennis Burton, the other at Duke with Bart Haynes. I would argue two of the most important basic science programs. They were the engine of vaccine development that was going into the clinical trial network, the HVTN. So while the HVTN exists still, although diminished because of funding, CHOV-D was the basis of its pipeline. Similarly, the Scripps CHOV-D was the engine of a lot of the work that IAVI has been doing with Gates Foundation funding. So when you start looking at what's been cut, you realize that whether it's upstream basic science or downstream delivery, what's happened in the last 6 months has and you don't need me to tell you this, you all live it, but it's been destructive. But again, I don't want to just be depressing. I do want to quickly do a language check. We talk a lot about wanting choice and prevention, but I do want to distinguish between options and choices, particularly because we've had a really remarkable decade of science, of products being developed across the board, both for treatment and for prevention. And options I think of as the biomedical products. That's what R&D delivers that should be added to a method mix. Choice is when things get messy because it starts moving beyond just the clinical trials, but it's when you involve the policymakers, the providers, the people, the sexual partners, that mix is all about how to deliver it to people. And that's where we have failed for the decade, even as science has been remarkable. And so translating options into choices. We know that it works. This is from over 60 years of contraceptive research, a meta-analysis done by the World Health Organization and I'm realizing I'm using all my acronyms, apologies. That is about the research and development of products. And I talk a lot about R&D and D. We need the research and development to develop the method, and then delivery programs to make those actual choices. And you can see that over 60 years, contraceptives did that. When contraceptive availability, actual ability for someone to access that product was real, contraceptive prevalence went up. And for decades, and I think back to early work, Ward Cates, may he rest in peace, who was a legend and mentor to me, talked a lot about this. How do we create in HIV what has been the reality for contraceptive programs? And the reality is, it's not just about the development of them, it's about the delivery. And it was high concept, it was hypothetical what we wanted to do in HIV prevention. But the good news is it's beginning to be real. And this just shows you that the voices of choice are not just the research and developers. It's not just Ward Cates or advocates. It's civil society. These two came out in the last year and a half or so. The one on the left, the African Women Prevention Community Accountability Board, a remarkable group of women's health activists who drove a choice manifesto for women and girls in Africa. And around the same time, led by a group called GBGMC, Global Black Gay Men's Connect, created along with AVAC, the Global Key Population HIV Prevention Advisory Group that outlined a roadmap for key populations and prevention. So it's not just the science talking, it's communities driving what they want from prevention. And we know that it works. This is data. This was actually the first data we had about injectables outside of clinical trials. This was presented at CROI now a year and a half ago. The SEARCH study in Kenya and Uganda, which showed that in the blue bars on the left, the group that was given access to this dynamic choice of oral PrEP, cabotegravir, and PEP, compared to in orange, a group that were just in the standard community clinic where PrEP was available. You can see that in blue, the dramatic shift and increase from about 13% of people having their sex acts covered with some form of prevention compared to almost 60% amongst those who had this dynamic choice. What is my favorite number in prevention is 0. You can see that in the dynamic choice, there wasn't a single infection and an incidence rate of about 2% in the standard of care. So choice really matters. But what's so interesting is if everyone in SEARCH simply chose cabotegravir, all you would have been doing is recapitulating 083 and 084, the two HPTN trials that demonstrated cabotegravir was safe and effective. And what you found at the bottom here is that when given a choice, not everybody chose cab. That, and the numbers don't add up to 100 because people could choose more than one product. But it basically showed that just almost 60% of people chose cab at some point, but access and choosing oral PrEP increased dramatically. So when people were given a choice, they were more likely to choose something than if they walked into a clinic and just got whatever was available. So it really matters. But it matters not because we have these products like cabotegravir and oral PrEP. And this is an adaptation of a slide from Wafa El-Sadr that really shows that for all the talk in both prevention and in treatment about biomedical options, that there is no such thing as a biomedical product all by itself. Whether that's HIV and condoms and PrEP or circumcision, whether it's SARS-CoV-2 and a COVID vaccine, it's not just the product, it's the program that delivers it. And that program has to address behavioral and structural issues. So every product should be seen through this kind of tripartite lens of behavioral, structural, and biomedical. One of our problems, I believe, is that those who work in biomedical prevention and in treatment think that if we build it, they will come. And so we build it and they don't come because we don't think about the behavioral and structural issues. But we have to if we want to have impact. And part of that is trying to understand the user journey. And I find it so interesting, again, not being a health worker, and apologies to those of you on the line. I know those on the line are health workers who understand what it means to be user-centered. But for many health providers and many health systems and for many funders, there's this hyper focus on who's at risk and how do I find them. And of course, epidemiologically, that's what we want to do. We want products for prevention to be in the hands and bodies of the people at greatest need. But people don't live their life thinking, am I at risk of HIV or not? And where do I go to get prevention? That's not reality. What we find, and this is based on data from all sorts of research activities, many of which many of you have conducted, users are not thinking about their risk as a starting point. They're thinking about what they want, and that's often about their own sexuality, their sex lives, their relationships. Maybe at some point we can get them to talking about HIV and HIV testing. And the good news is that at some point, these two journeys do land similarly at products. But we have to start programmatically working much more from the user perspective, meet people where they are, talking about the issues they care about, not the issues that we care about. And the other point I want to highlight on this slide is when we talk about choice, it's not just about choice in products. It needs to be choice in the program. Where do I want something and from whom do I want it? We might have a great product that a doctor can deliver in a clinic, but if that person who we think and who they themselves think needs and wants that product, if they don't feel comfortable in the clinic, then it doesn't matter how good your injectable lenacapavir is. It doesn't matter that no one got infected in Purpose One. If a young woman can't go into the clinic because of any barrier, Len is 0% effective because she never got it in her abdomen to begin with. So we have to think about choice of product, but also choice of the where and from whom. And that's really, this is a kind of a summary of work that we did in South Africa with adolescent girls and young women, looking at what they really wanted. And guess what? It wasn't about a ring or a pill or an injection. And this is really a summary of this work. And it's not going to surprise many of you on the line. And I see a few of you who been telling us this for a decade or more. Sarit, I see you. Think relevance, not risk reduction. Think a habit people get into, not do they adopt our health worker product or behavior. Think about relationships, not about HIV. Think about people's needs, not about demographics. I'm always struck that programs say, oh, we need to reach 15 to 24-year-old young women in Africa, as if 15 to 24-year-old women in Africa are a monolith. They're not even a monolith in one community, let alone across a continent. Key pops are not the same everywhere. And we need to think about them and their individual needs, not the demographic profiling. Think about ecosystems, not interventions. People aren't thinking about Len or CAB. We on this call all do. I think we've probably spent too much time talking about lenacapavir and cabotegravir. We have to think about the ecosystem in which these interventions are delivered. And that's about the health system, and it's about the larger programmatic context. And think about options for people to switch between over time, not about their preferences. And even if they have that preference, again, back to the structural issue, if a government doesn't procure cabotegravir, even if someone prefers cabotegravir, it doesn't really matter. They need those options available on an ongoing basis. And again, lots more links online, and these hyperlinks work, and I'm happy to have these slides shared if anyone wants. So our world is in a terrible place, to state the obvious. Oral PrEP, again, from 2010, we knew was safe and effective. It was only 11 years later, in 2011, that we began to see this big uptick in PrEP. The good news, there was an uptick in PrEP, and this was driven by new PEPFAR leadership that really prioritized prevention. And in fact, these were the folks under John Nkengasong who really wanted to lean into cabotegravir beginning in 23 and 2024. That's the good news. The bad news when you look at this data is that, we may never see this data again because PEPFAR has decided, or I shouldn't say PEPFAR, the US presidential administration has decided that data is not critical, and it's not going to be collected in the same way that it once was. And I think we need to know this and keep this high on our minds globally as we think about the future, because we've been relying on data to make decisions, and that data is not going to be as easily, at least in the global setting, from PEPFAR. But it also means that this platform that was being built from oral PrEP and then layered on the dapivirine vaginal ring and cabotegravir, and was really going to be how we delivered Len at scale, is potentially not going to be there by the end of this year and early next year, when lenacapavir actually is imported into various countries. So our ecosystem has had a shock, unlike anything we might have imagined. This just gives you a quick snapshot, and we have this online on our prepwatch.org website about the stop work orders. The risk, not only about PrEP on the left and cabotegravir on the right, but right in the middle, one of the biggest, most egregious assaults is on gay men, transgender individuals, people that this administration wants to erase. 3.5 million people globally through PEPFAR, but we all know that this is happening in the United States as well. People that this administration doesn't want to believe even exists, wants to see erased. means they're going to lose access to prevention and to treatment. And what happens if that's the case? This is just looking at sub-Saharan Africa, but it's true globally. This is from the HIV Modeling Consortium of what might happen to incidence if we don't keep PrEP and VMMC and condoms alive. And that means that we can, within the next couple of years, certainly by 2030, when we talk about wanting to end AIDS as a public health threat, the flip side of that at the current dispensation is we could be back where we were in 2000. Now, I know some of you on the line are too young to remember what 2000 was like. We were coming into a golden era of science when antiretroviral therapy was shown to be incredibly powerful and was not accessible to anyone outside of wealthy countries. It was then that PEPFAR and the Global Fund got started to deliver treatment at scale and having huge impact. Most of this impact is actually from treatment as prevention, but it needs prevention. It needs primary prevention to be here to keep these numbers down and to actually drive us to what was meant to be ending an epidemic as a public health threat. So lots of risk, again, you know that. And this is true on the research side as well. This is an analysis of NIH research funding. Just looking at the early termination of grants, and HIV took the kind of the frontal assault of research grants being slashed, in part driven by the hyper focus by this administration on what they think of trying to destroy DEI, which they're doing a pretty good job of. But you can see the impact. These numbers don't add up to 200 because obviously many of these, a single grant could cover many of these categories. But you can see, and I want to highlight this because we're excited by lenacapavir today. But if we don't have the investments in this kind of research, both basic science as well as research in places like South Africa, we're not going to have a lenacapavir of tomorrow. Lenacapavir clinical program was funded entirely by Gilead Sciences, but capsid discoveries were funded by the NIH, the South Africa research infrastructure, and Uganda infrastructure that led to the Purpose 1 result wouldn't have happened if NIH hadn't invested for 20 years. I'll talk a bit about MK-8527. The next big and I think super exciting piece is happily being supported by Merck directly as a company along with the Gates Foundation, but it depends on a clinical infrastructure. And it depends on trust and confidence in biomedical research that is beyond the scope of Merck and the Gates Foundation. So these cuts have implications not just for NIH-funded work. And as I put here, the potential fallout is not just about a U.S. government investment being lost, but it's the benefits that the whole ecosystem derives. Ministries of health, other companies, other philanthropies benefit. And you know, if you think about HIV or TB and not invest in research in South Africa, you're basically saying we're not going to have any more HIV and TB discoveries, at least not as quickly, even if other funders come in and start investing pieces of these things. You know, there is a reliance, perhaps wrongly, perhaps unfairly, but a reliance on this U.S. government investment. And we really have to think about what an ecosystem of the future looks like. Not how do we fill the gaps of the NIH and USAID, but how do we build an ecosystem for the future that is far more resilient. In the context of PrEP, though, I do want to spend a minute about what it means to go to scale with speed and equity so that we can have impact. And part of this is work that's been done for a number of years by a number of people. This adapted from Kim Green at PATH, looking at how we differentiate, simplify, and demedicalize PrEP. This, of course, is challenging. We were doing this in the context of oral PrEP, and now we're about to have cabotegravir hopefully still exist and go to scale, and certainly lenacapavir, not products that you can easily say are able to be simplified and demedicalized as an oral pill might be, which is one of the reasons why a monthly tablet is so exciting and so compelling. But we need to still look, even with the products we have that are somewhat over, you know, are more medicalized and health systems dependent, how we deliver them. And that means we really need to unpack the programmatic elements of delivering a product, not just the product itself. We did do this in an analysis that we published just before Kigali about getting PrEP rollout right, an analysis in 7 countries, looking at the themes of what works and what doesn't work. and how to apply that to Len. And again, it looks at a range of different issues, not just about supply chains and regulatory approvals, but stakeholder engagement, health system strengthening, and especially demand generation. And I do want to spend just a minute. For the last 15 years, I think there's been a real phobia about promoting PrEP. Now, obviously, Vive got over it and eventually, had a lot of advertisements that you've probably seen on U.S. television for Apretude, as cabotegravir is branded. But we have not, as a public health community, as aggressively and proudly, as many people said in the early PrEP days, make PrEP famous. We're afraid because early on there were programs doing oral PrEP that they didn't know that they could meet the demand, even for a product that was widely available and relatively inexpensive. And then you get into cabotegravir, where it was not widely available and there was a scarcity mentality and a fear to generate demand. Honestly, as much as I would hate for someone to be excited by a product and come into a program and be told that they don't have any available today, I'd rather have that than no one knowing that PrEP even exists. And I worry, sitting here in 2025, 15 years after oral PrEP was first shown to be safe and effective, that we still have too many people in this country and this world who don't even know that PrEP is safe and effective in any form. So we've got to get over this phobia of not being able to meet demand, because it can help drive the volumes up so the prices go down. And that's been a big driver. People don't want to create demand because, oh my God, it's too expensive. Well, the only way it's going to get cheaper is if we build demand and drive the volumes higher so that multiple generic manufacturers can make the product. That's why TDF-FTC is so cheap. If TDF-FTC were still only available from Gilead, it wouldn't be as cheap as it is today. It's because 15 companies make it. And that's not the case with CAB, and it's not the case with Len, not because the companies didn't license it more broadly, but because there's not enough volume. So this is a volume business. Speaking of volume, so here's the pipeline. And again, most of you know this. Just a few things to highlight from this graphic. Cabotegravir was reduced in price from $180 to $160 per person per year for low and middle income countries, still seen as far too expensive relative to oral PrEP, which is about $40 per person per year. Along comes Len, now approved by the FDA, recommended by WHO, which is terrific. We are told by Gilead that volume is not an issue as it was for CAB, and they have offered large volumes. Donors have not yet procured it, and they've said they've not disclosed the price publicly, unfortunately, which is a big problem because it's hard to plan if you don't know how to budget. But we are told that it is going to be less than cabotegravir, and best guesses are that it will launch later this year in low and middle income countries around $100 per person per year. So much less than CAB, still 2.5 times the price of oral PrEP. But that price can come down, I believe, as multiple generics. And I have a slide to show you the timing for that. Again, very exciting news coming out of Kigali. Expressive 10 and 11 are now on clinicaltrials.gov. I believe Expressive 11 is now begun or beginning. Expressive 10 right behind it. Super exciting news. And then I want to highlight this product that AVAC and partners spend a lot of time on, a dual prevention pill, combining oral contraceptive with oral PrEP. This would be the first new prevention method since 1993. I'll let you all put in the chat what you think that last multi-purpose product was in 1993 that was approved by the FDA. If you're counting, that's 32 years. And every user-centered study says that everybody, women, men, gay, straight, transgender, want products to meet multiple sexual health needs. So a dual pill for oral contraception and HIV protection, a potential product to prevent STIs and HIV, 32 years and not a single new joint, combined product has been licensed. That is an R&D failure. This shows you what happens in injectable Len. Again, the 2 major efficacy trials, but importantly, 3 smaller studies in parallel to show you that, research and development. Oh no, Julie, sorry, Naloxone 9 never shown to be anything other than a contraceptive. And in fact, studied as a microbicide and failed terribly, sadly, and actually increased risk. But you can, and that data came out in 2000, but you can try again. But you can see these other studies looking at other populations, and I think this is how we begin to see the field emerging. Oh, of course. Thank you, Sarit. Yeah, some people said it was a terrible name, Reality. It's called Femidom in the UK, which is even worse name. It was the female condom, which was the Reality brand. Getting to zero is not going to be easy, even with lenacapavir, although the clinical trials were amazing, both Purpose 1 with just with no infections and then Purpose 2 coming out with those 2 infections. An incredibly safe and effective product, as is cabotegravir, as is Oral Prep. These are all terrific products. And I think it's important to note that it's not that one is better than the other. It's that we have a range of safe and effective products. And this just tries to highlight where we are right now. In addition to looking at these 4 different products, what's really important, and I didn't add MK8527 here because I didn't want to make the font any smaller, but every future product beyond these 4 and MK8527, I believe, and we at AVAC worked with a number of partners on what's called the People's Research Agenda that really documented what has to happen going forward, which is that any future research and development investment, whether from a company or a foundation or from the US government, has got to fill a true gap in its target product profile. We've got an amazing set of products here on screen, and if 8527 is indeed safe and effective, we'll add to that. But any future product, whether PrEP or vaccine or antibody, truly has to compete with these. And I don't mean to put it so harshly about competition, but it has to compete with these on something, whether that's the delivery system programmatically or the delivery of itself. There's no implant currently here on this chart. It has to compete on price. It has to compete on efficacy. And it has to be balanced against these other products. And I believe we're at a fascinating moment in HIV prevention that it is going to be harder and harder to justify future efficacy trials unless it can really compete with what's in here. And I want to be clear, I believe there is still need for these other approaches. There are still gaps, but we can't just merrily go along testing every product knowing what we've got today. We did that 10, 15, 20 years ago. That was before we had any of these products licensed. This just gives you a quick snapshot of we talk a lot about person year of protection. It got very confusing when Global Fund and PEPFAR in December announced that they were committing to 2 million person years of protection. So what is a person year of protection? I don't have a graphic showing 211 because that is entirely coitally dependent. If you don't have any sex in a year, you don't need 211, you need 0 pills. If you have sex basically twice a week, you probably need 211 amounts to daily oral prep and everything in between. So this just gives you a sense of what a year of protection looks like. And again, if 8527 works, it'll look very much like the dapivirine vaginal ring, a monthly product. But just to give you a sense of comparison. And it is really important that although we think of Len as an injection, it is so important that we recognize that it is a combination product and that those 4 tablets are not optional. They are part of the label. That's how you get to 0 infections in Purpose 1 and only 2 infections in Purpose 2, because the time to protection of Len relies on those 4 tablets over the first 2 days. So time to protection is not shown here, but it's very important. We know that oral prep can take anywhere from 7 to 20 days to get to protective levels. We know that Len can go much faster. One of the most exciting things to me in all of IIS 2025 was hearing the possibility of data that Ken Mayer presented from the MK8527 phase 2, that time to protection of 8527 may be even faster. So that's a space to watch. It's predicted. We don't know, but I'm super excited by that, because getting someone protected from the minute they say they want PrEP is really a powerful additional part of the target product profile. What goes into the future? So in oral prep, the world moved slowly and shambolically. Everyone did their own thing. We had 131 demonstration projects early on, most of which didn't really demonstrate as much as we wanted to, which is, how do you deliver a product? This is the question. How do you deliver a product with speed and scale and equity to deliver impact? And that didn't get answered in 131 oral prep demonstration projects. So we need a collective agenda across countries, across funding agencies, of how do we actually move a product to the real world faster? Because if we wait a decade, that's 2035. And remember, the UN committed to having ending HIV as a public health threat by 2030. If we were really going to do that, which we clearly are not, we were already off target even before the regime took over in this country. But even if we were on target for 2030, we can't wait 10 years for Len to get to scale in 2035. These products become redundant. They become unnecessary if we actually were to reach the targets. So we need to really go faster. We track this on our website. This is on PrEP Watch through the Long Acting PrEP Coalition, a quarterly dashboard. And you also have to go with scale. We cannot end the epidemic with DVR and CAB because the volumes from both manufacturers was too small to have any impact anywhere. And that's not their fault. No, the donors didn't want to buy it, so they didn't make it. We need to get bigger volumes faster. The good news with Len is that volume seems not to be a rate limiting factor, and we will see if that makes the difference. What could happen with Len? Well, PEPFAR and Global Fund said they'd like to get 2 million people over 3 years access to Len. This is data that we created based on current oral PrEP uptakes. And looking at, again, going back to the search data and a number of cabotegravir studies that showed about 60% of people chose an injectable when given an option. So if you take this data and the PrEP market continues to grow, which is a big if because of the whole PEPFAR situation, but if it does, we could imagine if funders wanted to, that's a choice. We talk about, we want users to choose between products. Donors have a choice to make. If they choose, they could help get 1.5 million people on lenacapavir next year. That's a choice. And that choice could actually result in a much more accelerated curve down of incidence. That's a choice. Right now, it's not clear that we're going to see more than 500,000 or 600,000 people on Len next year because the donors have made a choice that they want to wait. I don't know what they're waiting for, but this is an opportunity and this is the time to act. And I would encourage everyone to be an advocate for accelerated action here because we have an opportunity and we need better choices made. One of the reasons donors are ambivalent is they don't know the price. Again, we believe, rumor has it that Len will come in at about $100 per person per year, which would actually be pretty impressive at launch. From Gilead, and then with generics, that price could likely get down to $60, $50, or $40 a year, closer to oral PrEP within the next 3 or 4 years. But that assumes that somewhere between 3 and 6 of the generic license holders actually compete for a big market. Because if they don't compete for a big market, you don't get economies of scale. You don't get the price down. But we can go faster. We've shown the world as a collective that we learned how badly we did with oral PrEP. The world didn't do much better with DVR. That's a grave disappointment. They did a little better with CAB. And already you can see we're doing a little bit better with Len. And I'm hopeful that many of these question marks will turn to solids within the next year or two. And we might actually be on the path to doing something better, faster. And when we add MK-8527 here, we don't know when we're going to find out its efficacy, but if it's effective, I hope that we go even faster from day one. This just gives you a quick snapshot of what happened with Len. I won't go into details. It's available online. This does give you a sense of generics. We are projecting that generic CAB and generic Len will enter the marketplace around the same time. We expect they will both be filing sometime next year with regulators and with WHO. And there's a whole reason why that is and why Len is going so much faster. I won't get into it here, but if people have questions, happy to take them. What's important is this innovation pileup that could happen in the out years. So we have potentially in 2027 generic CAB and generic Len potentially coming to market around the same time in 2027 if they present to regulators next year. At the same time, longer acting CAB could be available, or at least data could be available late next year, and once a year Len. But are donors going to buy 4 versions of these 2 injectables? No, they're going to choose at most 2, and I think probably only 1. And then around that time in late 27, early 28, depending on the trial, we hope we'll get results of 8527. So we need to do everything right now thinking about what to do about getting ready for this other product and getting ready for a choice between, I don't know, once a year Len and once a month 8527. That could be a pretty exciting universe to be in. because we could have impact. This is Len, but I think it's true of any of these products. If we go to scale, if we get coverage high, which we've never done with prevention, we could actually drive incidence down. This just shows you that if you actually got coverage in, particularly in generalized epidemics, up, you could avert at least 50% of the next wave of new infections. That's huge. And this from just South African data that you could bring about epidemic control 10 years earlier. Projected right now at 2042 by current baseline, it could happen 10 years earlier if we do the right thing. And doing the right thing means not just new products, it means advocating for programs, because it's never just the product, it's the program that delivers these options. And no product is perfect. And there's no, there is no miracle drug, despite what people said in Munich last year. Len is great. It's not a miracle. No product is, and no product ever will be, because every product has to be weighed with these range of issues, whether it's efficacy or side effect profile or user burden versus health system burden. Every product needs to be seen in a more comprehensive way. Expressive, this is the 8527 footprint of trials. As I say, Expressive 11, I believe, is just beginning, and Expressive 10 soon to come. And I would say there's a lot we can all do to prepare, hopefully, for success. Because at the end of the day, it's about those who use, those who choose, and those who pay the dues. We obviously want users to have choices, but we also need to understand that programs and health providers and funders have choices. So what does it mean for the way forward? I would say we need to prioritize like we never have before. What we've all experienced with NIH budgets, with PEPFAR budgets over the last 20 years, I believe tragically it's a thing of the past. So we need to prioritize and say what really matters. We need to lean into innovation, and I don't just mean about Len. I mean things like artificial intelligence, like innovative trial design for trials and innovative delivery systems for programs. Think systems, not diseases. We have to think and collaborate differently. I love seeing all of you on the line. We need some new, fresh blood and new perspectives entirely. And very importantly, from an advocacy perspective, everyone focuses on sustainability as an economic conversation. We want to sustain it, with other countries paying instead of PEPFAR. Well, sustainability has to be about sustaining impact, and I believe that prevention is core, absolutely core to sustainability, but it's not understood that way by most people. So we have a lot of work to do, and we need to let that be led by communities and countries and providers at country and community level. I'm going to stop there. I see Ken online. I've gone too long, so I'm going to shut up and open it up for any questions or comments.
Yeah, Mitchell, that was fantastic as ever, and we do have some questions. But back to that 1993 question that Sarit mentioned, reality, that was the female condom, and Mitchell has more than a passing interest in that, since I think that was your baptism of fire in HIV prevention work, correct?
It was, and I learned right then, never fall in love with your product.
Yeah.
I worked for a wonderful woman who ran the company. She was amazing and helped me in my career, but she was too in love with her product. Don't fall in love with your product, because the products do not prevent infections if they don't get used. And we missed the mark on that.
So one question is, has there ever been a national contraceptive program? So I think Charles Gonzalez, I think, is getting at a national PrEP program. Do we have a model, a template here in the United States?
Not in the US. And I think this is one of the things that I think COVID really exposed that. And, and people are very critical of the CDC, during the COVID epidemic. I mean, and many of you on the line know this, Charles, better than I. So much happens at the jurisdictional level. So it's about states and municipalities having authority. So we haven't seen that. I do think, having said that, there is an opportunity and there is a national PrEP program. Certainly colleagues at PrEP for All, and we really have pushed for that and continue to push for it. I think even if delivery, and this is important not only in the US, delivery for products, particularly those that are medicalized like CAB and LEN, and even oral PrEP, are going to come through health systems. But we could imagine national programs around demand creation, around kind of the wraparound or the surround sound of programming, even if delivery is fairly regimented because of funding flows to states and cities, or the way PEPFAR or Global Fund operates. So I think we do need to think differently and map out programmatically what aspects can be done at a national level.
Thanks, Mitchell. And Mamletsis is asking about the 4-month CAB. Is Do you see that as making a difference in terms of the laggard uptake of CAB? Does it change the equation at all?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I think it's going to be challenging. I mean, when they presented data at CROI this year and even in the year before, and I have a great deal of respect for ViiV, and they've done a lot of things with CAB better than were done with oral prep. But when they called it ultra long acting, it makes me a little hesitant. I mean, when we already had, and that was when we knew Len was in the field at 6 months, let alone 1 year. So I don't think that adjective works. It's not ultra long acting. It's just 4 months. I do think, and particularly for a program with focused on cisgender women, I'm not sure 4 months helps. I think that aligning with DMPA is hugely important, which is one of the benefits of Len, because a woman could come in and get Len and her DMPA, 3 months later come in just for DMPA, 3 months after that come back and get Len and DMPA, etc. 2 and 4 months are just off cycle. And you're not someone coming in 2 months or 4 months and supposed to come back for 3 months. So that's unique to cisgender women. But I don't know, unless the only way 4 months really going to have major impact, Giannis, I think, is if the price, at least for LMICs, drops massively from where it is. And I don't know that that's going to happen.
Okay, we got a bunch of questions now. So one question is about the possibility of seroconversion and concerns about multi-drug resistance. Do you want to comment perhaps on seroprep and some of the other ways that we're tracking that?
Yeah, no, I think it's really important. I think, people talk about, oh, let's just put PrEP out there to everybody. Well, you need really good programs, because there are going to be people who aren't going to come back every 6 months, and they're not going to get the oral loading dose second time around. So we're going to see infections. We saw them with CAB, we saw them with oral PrEP. The one big difference, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, Ken, I remember early PrEP meetings with you. A meeting wasn't complete if they didn't mention resistance. And oh my God, what about we're going to create all of this? And we didn't really do PrEP very well because we were so scared. I think we have to accept that there will be infections. There are going to be infections without PrEP. There will be infections with PrEP. We need good programs that monitor this to be sure that if someone has a breakthrough infection on a subtherapeutic prevention product, that we know what to do in making sure their treatment options are better. I do think with Len, we have less of a concern because it's CAB, it was so closely related chemically to dolutegravir that it really freaked people out. People aren't thinking that with Len so much.
Okay. So we've got 3 questions in a row, and I'll give you a lightning round to answer all 3. So much of HIV prevention is merely HIV testing, especially at the local level. You face funding cuts. This gets worse. How do we battle the current climate? PrEP method switching, what we know. And then Sarit's comment is because Gilead self-funded Len trials, user acceptability data is quite limited.
Yeah.
Do we know how to talk to patients about these issues?
Oh my gosh, great questions, all 3 of you. Testing, it's going to be a huge problem. I do think, and again, we'll see what happens in the US. I do think WHO guidelines that were released in Kigali were not only about Len, but they started talking much more permissively about using HIV self-testing, making testing simple. And Cheryl Johnson, who leads testing at WHO, is the smartest person about this that I know. I'm really thinking about how we simplify testing, not only to help people navigate both treatment and prevention, but to save money. We spend a lot of money on testing that she believes could be saved and harnessed to put back into the treatment and prevention program. So I think it's an area that really needs to be thought through. And we shouldn't just assume, when I talk about, leaning into innovation, I think we need to really think about how to benefit from self-testing and other approaches. We know hardly anything, Tessa, about method switching, and that's a problem. Because most of what we know of CAB and oral PrEP and Len, well, oral PrEP, we know a lot of stuff outside of trials, but CAB and Len's been almost entirely in clinical trials. So we don't know what's really going to happen with product switching. I think we can assume, we saw in cabotegravir programs that a consistent decline every 2 months of return, still way higher than the return rates on oral PrEP, but not as high as what you saw in a phase 3 trial, which isn't a surprise. Will they want to choose to switch to oral, or will they want to switch in the future to a monthly pill? Will they happily switch between CAB and Len? Those are unanswered questions. I think, Tessa, that's a big part of the implementation science agenda going forward. And Sarit, you're right. We've seen very little data come out about the user experience. I don't think, frankly, that's only because it was self-funded by Gilead. With all due respect, I think we saw, we've seen this in every clinical program. The data related to social and behavioral experience and user experience always seems to come later than the endpoint, which I understand, especially if it's a company wanting to get to market. But we need to push Gilead to get that data out. The nodules definitely exist for a somewhat not insignificant number. Anywhere from a third to a half of participants do develop a nodule in their abdomen because of the depot form of the product and it being there. Again, and I heard the same thing from the HPTN about side effects in 084. Well, it was a side effect, but people came back in our trial. Well, and Gilead says the same thing. Nodules don't matter because they came back in our trial. If I have to say it one more time ever again, phase 3 trials are not real life. Of course they came back. They didn't tell us people liked the product or they liked the nodule. They told us they liked being in the clinical trial. So we don't really know. And I think even as we get more data, Sarit, we're not going to know about the user experience enough. And I think that's an area that you and colleagues can do a hell of a lot over the next months and years answering.
Yeah, and people in clinical trials are more highly motivated than necessarily people real world who may.
And they're actually compensated.
Yes. So this is a question I don't know the answer to this. Rahima Benabor says, do we think a 10 ml injection for Len once a year will reach high acceptability compared to 3 ml? I wasn't aware that it was that much medication for the once a year. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, the bolus, I mean, the study that they presented at CROI, it actually had 2 different formulations at both very high volumes. It's huge. And Rima, it's a great question. I don't know. And I was on a call earlier today with some of you. I don't think unless any of you on the line actually have ever received CAB in your buttocks or anywhere else, or LEN in your abdomen or anywhere else, I don't think any of us are qualified to answer the question. I don't know what people will want. For 1 year of protection, will they be willing to go a little bit higher pain threshold? Maybe. 1 less clinic visit? I don't know. But I think you're asking the right question. I know Gilead is looking hard at what formulation they put into their pivotal bioequivalence to show once a year. But I think we need to ask that question of them and of our programs.
Yeah, we're getting towards the end, but really important question from Edelstein about thoughts about how we head off disparities. He's Len, so we have less of a gap than we've been seeing with oral prep.
Zoe, I love that question so much, and I don't have an answer. I mean, I have a thought, and that is that every biomedical introduction, and we saw the same exact thing with COVID vaccines, biomedical introduction tends to exacerbate disparities, not addressing them, unless we systematically decide that we're going to address them. And I don't want to put the onus on you sitting in the great city of New York's health department, but it's the programs that can help us overcome it. And I think we need to look at this in a new way. And I think I'd love to see Len be the first biomedical product, to my knowledge, that diminished a disparity rather than exacerbating it. And I think we head it off by just being smarter and more user-centered and knowing that that's, begin with the end in mind. And that is that we want to diminish disparities, not reinforce them.
Well, that's a great note to end on. And Mitchell, I think you simulated a lot of thinking on part of the very esteemed colleagues here who are on this chat. So on the behalf of Patrick Sullivan and myself, we really want to thank you for this wonderful discussion. And you're always welcome to come back and stimulate us further. I just want to remind folks that we do meet every other month. Our next session is going to be October 6th at noon East Coast time. We are in the process of putting together our speakers for the fall. So please write to Patrick and myself if you have ideas, either self-volunteer or topics or speakers you think are very relevant for this working group of antiretrovirals for prevention through the CFAR network. And again, thank you so much to Mitch Warren, and I'll take care, everyone.
Great. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. Cheers, all.
It's great. Thank you, Mitchell.